Good morning, Erika. Thanks for joining us on our
Morning.
educational webinar. You are going to be presenting this morning on cultivating loving relationship with self, family, and friends. We're really excited to have you. You have been a fervent supporter of Athlete Soul since the beginning and a transition coach for us. So really excited to have you here. As usual, the webinars are recorded and shared on our platform on our website at athletesoul.org. And we will be also sharing this information on our social media channels. So Erika, I am passing it on to you to get started. If you want to give us a little bit of background about yourself, then take it away.
Well, thanks, Miriam. It's always a pleasure to participate in anything Athlete Soul related. So I'm honored to be here. For those of you who I haven't had the pleasure of meeting, my name is Erika Fay. For the last 20 plus years, I'm going to date myself a bit, I've been a licensed marriage and family therapist. And since over the last 7 years, I really wanted to hone in on serving and supporting athletes to really live on purpose. So that means kind of feeling like feeling like you as an athlete, you are more than your sport in all arenas of your life. So feeling like you are living from a place that really feels in alignment with your highest self and your best self. And there's a whole process that I take my clients through, and I'm going to give you a little window into that today. So I'm really thrilled to be here with you. And let's get started. So obviously, when we talk about cultivating loving relationships with ourselves and with family and friends, our our relationship with self, and maybe this is because I have that psychology background, but I feel like we can talk for weeks about just that. So there's a lot that I'm going to give you today. And if you have any questions, I'd invite you to reach out to me. My contact information is here. And you can also get in touch with me through Athlete Soul. But the idea is, if we are really living from a place of being in harmony with who we are and have a really loving, healthy relationship with ourselves, that actually reflects and colors our relationships with our family and our friends. And there's a great quote by Maxwell Maltz, who wrote The Power of Self-Image Psychology. And he says, you can't outperform your level of self-esteem. And I love that quote because I think it's really important. As athletes, if we're transitioning away from our sport, there's going to be a relationship shift. There will be potentially some feelings of loss. And it always, like I said, how we feel about ourselves colors everything. So let me tell you a little bit more kind of about what we can do to increase and cultivate a loving relationship with ourselves. We'll kind of start there. Oh, I always like to start with a quick story because I think stories are really a great way to kind of capture attention and illustrate points. So there was a fisherman who went down to the river, and he was casting his line in the water, and he was looking down the river, and he saw this other fisherman just bringing him one fish after another. But what he noticed was that this fisherman was taking like the larger fish and measuring them against something, and then he would throw the bigger fish back. So the younger fisherman kind of watches this go on for a while, and then he comes up to him after a few minutes, and he was like, hey, I hate to interrupt you. He's like, but I'm noticing that you're catching one fish after another. But what's the deal? Like, you're throwing all the big ones back. Do the bony ones get big, or is there an ordinance about keeping fish of a certain size? And the older fisherman looks at him and he says, no, Sonny, you see that broken off ruler down here? And he points to the riverbank. He's like, that's the size of the frying pan that I have. And I love that story. You might be thinking, what does this have to do with self-image and relationships? But here's the thing. Most of us can reject ideas, will reject thoughts, will reject opportunities because we don't have a frying pan of understanding or awareness for that opportunity. So this is going to come back around at the end of our time together, but the idea is that our thinking is really powerful, and I'm going to show you more about how this works. But it's interesting, there's ways that we all have of doing things, ways maybe we connect to people, ways that we relate to ourselves. And some of them might be really supportive and empowering, and you feeling like you have the relationships that you have, and that you feel really connected and loving and healthy about your relationship with self. And some may not. The idea is just to take a non-judgmental assessment as we go through our time together. So let's move it along. I mentioned that your thinking is really important. So I'm going to invite you to ask yourself right now, what are some stories that you've been telling yourself about who you are and what you have in store for you? I mean, it's a big question. How do you define yourself? And again, non-judgmental assessment. This is for the purposes of taking inventory so that you can really look and turn up the volume on getting some support with changing anything that you feel or know that is not in alignment with who you want to become, or in service of who you are being in this world. There might be some stories about what you're telling or about what you think is possible for you. So perhaps you're transitioning away from your sport, or you have transitioned. What's the story you're telling yourself about that? Are you telling yourself it's going to be hard? Are you telling yourself that the next thing that you move along to is going to be filled with just as much joy and purpose and fulfillment as your sport? It's just important to have an understanding of some of the messaging that is playing in your mind, not for the purposes of condemnation, but for the purposes of examination, and really looking at what might be running in the background. And I'll tell you about why this is important in just a moment. So there are three key components, and I would argue that one informs the next. So a while back, I did a presentation for Athlete Soul on identity, life purpose, and mission. And we can spend hours, like I said, talking about that and relationship with self. But if you think about vision, purpose, and mission, your relationship with yourself and your relationship with others, this may sound existential, but it's absolutely true. Humans are wired to be a part of something. And so as our relationship with self can continue to change and grow and evolve as we change and grow and evolve, having a vision or a mission or a purpose that's really clear, that can help you to really cultivate a positive, loving, healthy relationship with yourself. And like I said before, life mirrors you. So your relationships will mirror the reflection of your deeply rooted internal belief systems. And I think we've all seen examples of this, maybe not in our own lives, maybe in our own lives, but definitely when we can reflect on kind of other people. And it's easier to see the whole picture when you're the one who's not in the frame. So sometimes looking at other people, it's easier to see this concept kind of brought into reality here. So I'm going to kind of give you just some brief, again, because this was another webinar that I did previously, but I want to tie in some of these things because I think it's really important in terms of cultivating your relationship with self. So having your purpose, knowing what your purpose is, there's a couple of things that I think are really relevant in terms of being persistent and resilient when times are tough, or when you're required to deal with life's most challenging situations. When you have a definite purpose, it removes confusion when deciding what to do next. So let's say your sport's ending, knowing that you have a deep longing and a deep purpose, let's say to really serve other people, or to be a part of a team, or whatever the case may be. I'll give you an opportunity to kind of dial in for your purpose here in just a moment. But the idea is, when we are clear on what our purpose is, it gives us an idea of kind of where we want to go. And I would argue too that this is a soul place. It's not just a thinking place, but it's a feeling place. So I'm going to use the word soul. I'm going to use the word spirituality because I have seen and I know. So if this resonates, if this doesn't resonate, just do an experiment with it and maybe take what you need and leave the rest. But there's a unique life path that each of us have been kind of granted the opportunity to kind of travel on. And it's not going to look exactly the same as anyone else's, because there are a number of different things that are specific to you, unique to you. But having a clear purpose can really help you feel like you're in alignment. We all know how it feels to be doing something that we don't want to do. Sometimes we have to do that, but if you know that you're doing that in service of something larger, it makes things a lot easier for you. So in order to get to a clarity around a purpose or a vision, it's important to take a look at your values and your passions and your personal assets. And so here's where I love to ask my clients, like, what was it about your sport that you really loved? Perhaps it was the teamwork, perhaps it was the competition, perhaps it was the growth. These are all values. And then if you look at passions and personal assets, like passions, what lit you up about the game? What was it specifically that lit you up about the game? You know, if you say winning, or what was it about winning? So you kind of dial in a little bit, and I'm taking you through this at breakneck speed. I'd invite you to go back and watch that other webinar, because I'd give you more time for exercises here and personal assessment. But then the personal assets are like, what have you discovered about yourself through your sport? Perhaps you've been told you're a natural leader. Perhaps you've been told that you're a good listener. Perhaps you've been told that you are really, really skilled at being able to anticipate needs. All of these things are your personal assets. And I'm often asked about the values, and people are unclear on that. So I want to give you a quick resource for that as I blow through this really, really quickly. I like to use Brene Brown's list of values, and here's a snapshot here. But if you Google Brene Brown, and her name is down here on the screen, and values, this will come up. And so you can kind of use this as a template so that you can kind of go through and get maybe clear on what was it about your sport that you really loved, and see if you can pull out the values that you have come to discover that are really meaningful for you. So then from there, we go into kind of a legacy. What would you love to be remembered for? And this all helps to craft the purpose and the mission beyond sport. So let me show you kind of another way of how this ties into your relationship with yourself and why this matters in terms of your thinking. I call this the results formula. If you've been in any of my webinars, most likely you've seen this, but I think it's really important, so I want to share it again. Our thoughts are constantly being impressed and informing our feelings. Now, think for a moment, like if you are having thoughts like, my sport just ended and this is going to be really hard for me, or this is really hard for me, you're going to be feeling feelings that reflect, my sport just ended, this is going to be really hard for me. Now, that doesn't mean that, well, it's just an example of your thoughts informing your feelings. And then our feelings are impressed into our actions. So we take very different action from a place of, this is going to be really hard for me, or I'm not feeling, you know, I'm sad, and fill in the blank. Then if we felt confident, we felt like there's opportunity here, and that ultimately creates our results. So when I'm talking about our results, I'm talking about what you see in the landscape of your life, what your relationships look like, what your health looks like, what your vocation is going to be or is, and your freedom, your time and money freedom. So our thoughts are constantly being impressed and informing our feelings. Our feelings are informing our actions, and our actions are ultimately what dictates our results. They dictate what we see in the landscape of our reality. And so the quality of our life is really determined by the quality of our thinking. And so what are you thinking about you, your value, what's next for you? Your level of fulfillment and your level of fun and joy and freedom that you can experience right now. And we have to get to the root of that. It's the thinking. So let me give you a little bit more of a framework for this. I keep talking about thinking and how that kind of is the impetus of where everything in terms of our relationship with self and others comes from. So If we were to take a look at this, our psychologists call this part of us our observer self. Buddhists call it the witness self. I've heard it called your noticer. The part of you that can get kind of zoom out and say, oh, that's interesting. I was just thinking that, or this is interesting. Now my thoughts are over here. It's the part of you that doesn't get caught up in your drama. And I work with my clients on really tuning into this part of you, because this is the part that is aware. This is the part that can notice your thoughts, but is not your thoughts. This is the part that can notice your body, but is not your body. It's your higher self. And what I love to work with my clients on is really strengthening their relationship to their higher self, your observer self, your witness self. And then beginning to make decisions from that place. That's kind of your soul connection. That's anytime you're able to connect with the observer self, you'll also know, am I moving in a direction that feels in alignment, or am I moving in a direction that doesn't feel in alignment? And again, I know I'm going through this at breakneck speed, so if there are any questions, please don't hesitate to reach out to me, but I want to give you everything I can in our time together. So let's go into, noticing your observer self and what this has to do with your relationship with yourself. And there are some energies that are required for us as humans, kind of getting clear on our purpose, on our mission, on our passions, and what we want to direct our life's energy to. There's two essential energies that are a part of this. I don't know if you've ever heard this, but like the pain of your problem and the burning desire for what you would love to create, those things are essential in creating new results. So if you're noticing that you're at a crossroads right now, you're noticing some longing, maybe some discontent, this can be information for you. What are you longing for? What would you love? Perhaps at the level of fact, a door is closing or closed, reflect on your values, your passions, your assets. This is another way to tune in and really design what you would love for your life. And this is important because as you get clarity on this, you also are cultivating that relationship with the you, with the capital Y, or the self with the capital S, like your highest self, your highest being. And that brings me to the next point, which is designing your vision. So if you were serving your values and using your assets and directing your energy into your passions, like I said, that's the soul place. And spirit is always seeking a larger expression through each and every one of us. Now, you can call it life. Life is seeking more through us. And it's not about doing, but it's about realizing that by means of us putting things into our life, whether it be relationships or a vocation that we feel is really meaningful, or optimizing our health, by means of doing this, we begin to realize that we are way more than just our sport. We're way more than what we have been doing, and we can start to kind of live our unique vision. So we realize we can surmount any circumstance, that we are more powerful than any situation or condition. And one of the ways that we do this, and this is one of the things that I love to do with my clients, and again, I know I'm going through this really quickly, I'm actually doing another webinar next week that is complimentary, that if you'd like to attend, you'll have way more time to kind of dial into some of these questions. And this question is, what would I really love? When you ask yourself, what would I really love? If you knew your longing and your discontent was essential for your evolution and your growth, and you leaned in and asked, what would I really love for my life? What comes up for you? And so I want to show you this other slide because I think that this is an important piece in terms of the quadrant system. And this is how, this is kind of the framework for how I work with my clients. When you have this 4-quadrant system, we go through each quadrant and ask that question, what would I love for my relationships? So for our purposes, let's stay there. You know, our relationships with ourselves. What would you love? What would you love to feel about you and who you are and what you're doing? And, you know, how would you love to kind of realize that relationship and experience that relationship? And then what would you love for the relationships that you're in, your friends, your family? And really begin to get crystal clear on what that would look like. Again, this comes from a soul place. You start to craft the vision of these relationships that you would love. And then we do this with all 4 quadrants for the purposes of our time together. I'm going to stay with relationships because that's the focus of our webinar today. But getting crystal clear, like if you knew that you were in the highest and the best relationships for you, what would be happening? How would you be feeling? What would you be doing? You know, what would that look like? Get crystal clear on that. And then coming from like that love place, not coming from what do I think is possible, or perhaps you're in a relationship right now that you're like, yeah, well, I don't know that it would ever be exactly what I'm looking for. You know, what if you could, what if you were able to really create a life and a relationship that felt really connected and meaningful and deep? And I'm going to tell you, there's a key to this in just a moment. And this is the key. What and who do I need to be? I mean, what are the qualities of the person in your vision? One of the ways to really cultivate loving relationships with others is to be even more loving. And I know that that can fly in the face of, you know, common hour thinking, but I will tell you, after being a marriage and family therapist for over 20 years, when we are really clear on how we can evolve and how we can show up as the highest and the best versions of ourselves, we can make massive transformation in the relationships that we are in our lives, including our love relationships. And I'll give you a framework for actually what you can do if you're kind of having some conflict in a relationship in a few minutes. But just know your vision already has your name on it. Like the relationships that you would love to create, that's already meant for you. And know that there's only one thing happening here. It's infinite intelligence at work in you and through your life. And that speaks in, I would say, 3 ways: longing, discontent, and love. So your desires for something more, that's coming from a soul place. And this is really a thinking technology that I use with my clients. When you can get crystal clear about what it is that you would love in your life, and for the purposes of our time together, your relationships, who you need to be, the qualities of the person in your vision, living into that, your evolution, your soul is being expressed, and your perception of yourself will then evolve as well. So you begin to be more loving, and you begin to see yourself as more loving. So it's a really cool kind of reflected reality if you're willing to do the work and willing to do, you know, put the time in and look at, you know, look at your life from this lens. But I also wanted to give you some tips from empowerment. And, you know, when we're working with the results formula, knowing that our thoughts create our feelings, oftentimes there are old limiting messages that may have been running in the background, that maybe we weren't even aware that we were running. And actually, this is really interesting. I heard the other day that like 92% of the average American just recycles old thoughts. It's called mentation. There's actually not a lot of new thinking that's involved. So think about that for a moment. If we know that our thoughts ultimately create our results, we have to get really rigorous about the thoughts that we are thinking, so that we're not just continuing to recycle old thoughts, having the same result in the end. So here's some things that we can kind of work with in terms of thinking steps. This will also help you to feel empowered. Some things that can really be supportive in you thinking the thoughts that are in alignment with the you that you would love to continue to become or evolve into. Or perhaps you know that there's this calling for you, or you have this desire to be, you know, really at peace with yourself, in a loving, healthy relationship with yourself, be a soft place to land for yourself. Here are some tips that you can start to practice with. The first tip is to let go of your past mistakes and just use them to get better. So instead of raking ourselves over the coals, which I am still working on this one, we decide, I'm using my mistake to make me better. So you can even reflect and say, oh, that was a total not it. I did not show up in the way I wanted to show up. That was a huge mistake. What's the learning here? How can I grow? How can I get even better? And then another thing that's really powerful is to avoid comparison despair. So we've heard, and Brene Brown has talked about this too. I'm a huge Brene Brown fan, if you couldn't tell already. She talks about how comparison robs us of joy. So when we look at someone, we say, oh, well, that I've been working just as hard, but they have this. That's comparison despair. It robs you of joy and empowerment. Here's a way that we can kind of work to reframe this. Instead of, oh, why do they have this and I don't? I feel like I'm working just as hard. Start to work with celebrating the successes of others. And here's the thing, when you're able to really get into the practice of this, you create a success momentum, because high tide raises all boats. So when you are, celebrating, like, good for you. Wow, that's awesome that you created that. You also are sending a message to your subconscious mind. If it's possible for them, it's possible for me. If any human can do it, that means it's possible for you. And part of the thing with this too is to make sure that you are refocused on your mission, your vision, because that, again, is a soul place. That's what's meaningful to you. And that has to do with your unique life print. And when you're in alignment with that, you just begin to see things begin to flow a little bit easier. Not that this whole process of cultivating relationships with yourself and others is easy breezy without any challenges. It's just, these are some things that you can use to kind of make sure that you're kind of on the path and working to be more on than off, and running old thought patterns that will lead to old ways of feeling, which will lead to old results. So let's shift now. And, we've spoken about your relationship with yourself, and obviously communication is a big part of that. The thoughts that you're thinking are ways that you're communicating to yourself. But let's shift gears a little bit and talk about your relationship with others. So every relationship is built on communication, whether you're communicating verbally or not, there's communication happening. And I'm going to give you some principles that you can use for effective communication. So this is really, really useful, whether you are in a team setting, a business setting, a family setting, a love relationship setting, a friendship setting. There's 3 principles that I love to share, and these are actually based on the work of Gay Hendricks, who has studied couples for decades. He and his wife, Katie, and I'm going to reference him in a moment, but one of the main things here for effective communication is to shovel while the piles are small. And I know that sounds funny, but think about how many times have we said, well, I'm just going to brush it under the rug. It's not as important. It's not important enough to say something about. Well, there's a trick for this. If you're waking up the next day and it's still bothering you, it's probably a good idea to say something, because, I know that we've all been there when we're in an argument and then we'll bring up everything but the kitchen sink that happened over the last 20 years or whatever, last 2 weeks or months or whatever it is. So when we get into the practice of shoveling while the piles are small, we're actually addressing something that could be just addressed in a short period of time, and then you move along. And I'm going to give you a framework for how to do this in just a second. So this is the first thing, getting into the practice of shoveling while the piles are small. The second thing is going direct, avoiding triangles. We have all been there where you want to complain to somebody, oh, can you believe what this person did to me? Or can you believe what they said? And just know that that creates triangles, and that is actually not an effective tool for communication and increasing connection in your relationships. So if you're shoveling while the piles are small, you're going directly to the person that, whatever hurt your feelings or wherever you're having the disconnect, and not involving a third party, like a friend or, your sister, or talking about your mom or whatever it looks like. So That's the second component. And here's the framework, the sweaty 10-minute conversation. So I love Gay Hendricks' quote. He says, behind every communication problem is the sweaty 10-minute conversation you don't want to have. So what if any communication problem that you actually had, if you're shoveling while the piles are small and you're going direct, is just able to be resolved in a sweaty 10-minute conversation. So I want to be clear on this. This is a daily kind of practice. This isn't like, you know, okay, so I'm going to have a sweaty 10-minute conversation with my friend about everything that's gone on for the last 10 years. No, that's not what we're talking about. We're talking about day-to-day interactions with people, that these are really powerful things that you can use so that you don't get down the road and feel like disconnected or walled off from each other. And I will tell you, as a therapist working with couples over the last 20 plus years, I, every day of the week, would love to see couples that were arguing and kind of yelling at each other versus the couples that were completely silent, and I could tell there was a chasm of hurt between them. The people that were actually engaged in an argument were way easier to kind of get moving towards their relationship goal of resolution or, you know, increased connection, versus the people that had years of hurt between them. There's so much resentment and walls built up. So this is an antidote to that. This is a daily, weekly, monthly practice, whatever. Perhaps you don't need to do it as often. You're the highest authority, knowing what piles you need to shovel. So let me give you a framework for this sweaty 10-minute conversation. First of all, it's important to set the intention and ask. So I'm going to give you an example from my life about this. So my partner, John, setting the intention, saying, hey, John, you know, I would love to have a conversation with you for the purposes of us increasing our connection and feeling closer. Is now a good time? That's setting the intention. So from there, you know, you get their permission. They get to opt in. Like, this is a good time for, you know, quick conversation. This isn't a good time. And you have to be open to that response from them. The second component of the sweaty 10-minute conversation is, here's what I see. So in this step, this is kind of you have to be really careful with this one. Just state the facts. So using my example, so great, John opted in. He said, yep, now's a good time. Let's have the conversation. Then I say, here's what I see. We had an agreement that we were going to leave the house at 7 o'clock to start our date night. And at the level of fact, we didn't leave until 7:15. Facts. That's it. Just no opinion. No, this is what happened. And then we move to the third step. Here's how I feel. And with the feeling, you want to get really careful that you don't go off into, I feel like you're being a jerk, or I feel like you know, were blowing me off, or whatever it is. No, here's how I feel. Use a feeling word. I feel sad. I was looking forward to spending time with you and I wanted to optimize all the time. I feel, you know, scared that we're not going to have the amount of time that we wanted to have. Here's how I feel. So a good rule of thumb with this is, see if you, what I think, if you use the sentence, here's what I think, and if it doesn't make any sense, I think sad, I think disappointed, I think scared, then you know you're in the feeling realm. But if you say, I think something, and it actually makes sense, then you're not using a feeling in this for this step. So make sure that you're just sticking to the feelings for this step. And then the fourth step is, here's what I would love. So for our purposes, this example, you know, I felt really sad. I was looking forward to spending time with you. Here's what I would love. I would love next time when we have our babysitter, we do leave right at 7 so that we can optimize every moment. And then we go to the fifth step. What would you love? So there's kind of an opportunity then for them to respond to you in the framework of this sweaty 10 minutes. And the outcome is a new agreement. So, you know, we go through this, you know, John opts in, I tell him, you know, the facts, the feeling, here's what I would love, what would you love? And then we make a new agreement. Okay, great. So next time we're going to shoot for, you know, wheels out the door at 7:01 as soon as the babysitter arrives or whatever it is, a new agreement that is reached. And so there's another component of this too. If you're noticing that you're showing up in a way that you're not proud of, I love to also kind of work with this, the power of a do-over. So to just like, let's say I start the 10-minute conversation, but I'm actually going off the rails and I'm not following the steps. I can catch myself and say, well, hold on. I'm sorry, that wasn't me showing up in the way I wanted to show up. Can I please have a do-over? And then you start again. So that's kind of a fun thing too. And certain relationships, depending on your level of intimacy, can allow for this or not, but it's something that I wanted to at least kind of mention so that you had that in your back pocket as a request option. So let me just recap the strategies for effective communication. You're shoveling while the piles are small. You're going directly to the person and not involving someone else. You're having this one sweaty 10-minute conversations. You're setting the intention, asking if it's a good time. You're stating the facts, you're stating how you feel, and you're saying, here's what I would love. What would you love? And all through this whole process, from like the beginning of our time together today, we're working with our power of perception. Remember, our thoughts always inform our feelings. So I have a great video that I want to kind of show you because I feel like this illustrates this point brilliantly. And then we'll talk again about like why this matters to you. We all have this superpower, and it's the power of perception. So check this out.
Watch the image on your screen closely. Which of the two grey sections is darker, the top one or the bottom one? If you chose one at all, then you were wrong. Because believe it or not, they are exactly the same color.
Okay, come on over. We're going to do a test.
Bo's going to prove to a group of volunteers that the two squares are the same color grey.
When you open your eyes, right, first time in the morning, say, do you think you see the world as it really is?
I say yes.
Yeah. You're seeing it. Oh, you're definitely.
That depends if I wear my glasses or not. Yes.
Yes. Yes? Yeah.
think so.
I mean, why not? All right, well, look at this cube here. What if I told you that those two surfaces are exactly the same? Would you believe me?
I would.
Okay, come on up. Okay.
Bo has attached a grey swatch to one of the surfaces to allow the volunteers to test this one out for themselves.
Take that dot and move that nice up here, right there.
Oh my God. No way. I want to do it again. Oh.
Crazy.
It's difficult to believe. Let's take another look at the illusion. Try holding up one of your hands and blocking this section of the image. And just in case you're still having trouble seeing it, here's that section blocked off for you.
Different? Same.
It's picking me out here.
What's going on?
Tell us.
Are we changing the surface? What's
No.
changing?
Our perception.
Our perception's changing.
Yeah.
Okay, why? That's the question. If we could understand this, we would understand how the brain works.
So how can what appear to be two distinctly different shades of grey actually be the same colour? It has to do with how your brain uses shadows to make decisions about what it's seeing.
So I love that video. You know, he talks about how your brain uses shadows to make decisions, and that's all through the lens of what's filtered through our eyes. Think for a moment about how you may stand firm to your version of the truth or your perception of reality when it comes to your relationship with yourself and other people. It's a great reminder, again, to connect to your observer self, that witness self. And you can ask yourself, do I usually go to a narration about situations or people's motives for things from a place of empowerment, or is it usually a place of victimhood? And this is a really powerful thing to practice with as you kind of work through cultivating that loving, healthy relationship with yourself and other people. It's just such a powerful thing, our power of perception. We can perceive something that can be exactly the same as somebody else perceiving it, and it can look wildly different in terms of the narration. So I just wanted to kind of point that out and also loop it back to the fisherman's story in the beginning, because, we have ways of thinking and ways of doing things that absolutely colors our experience of life. And so it's really important to get really rigorous with ourselves if we want to continue to grow, continue to cultivate connection with ourselves and other people. And really come from that place, like what is the growth in this? What is the learning in this? How could, I may not understand this, but what's the seed of good here? All of these things are required for our evolution versus going to the narrative, well, that happens always, or it's just another person who is, hurting me, or whatever the narrative is. But just being really mindful and rigorous. We all have self-limiting narratives. You're not alone in that, but just by means of you engaging in this webinar, you have the opportunity to take a look and shine the light of awareness on what the empowering things are that you're telling yourself and what maybe isn't as empowering, and really choose for yourself what you want to focus your attention on, because your thoughts, again, will direct your results. Remember the results formula. So let me give you a quick recap of what we've covered, and then we're going to bring this in for a landing with a great quote, and I think Miriam may have some questions. So we talked about the vision and how it relates to yourself. So having some clarity around your values, your passions, your assets. We talked about the results formula, how your thoughts ultimately inform your feelings ultimately inform your actions, and your actions equal the results in your life. We asked that question, what would I love? And really having that ability to come from that place, what if anything were possible? And that really helps to explore that deeper relationship with yourself. You're dialing down, you're getting clarity, you're allowing for that soul space in you to emerge by asking that question, what would I love? Not just what do I think is possible? And then I gave you some tips for empowerment. And one of those things is to celebrate the successes of others. I'd also invite you to celebrate your successes. Even if they're little, whatever, I did a 5-minute meditation this morning, or I did 20 minutes of yoga, whatever it is, just getting into that practice of celebrating your successes, because that creates success momentum, and you begin to see yourself as very capable, very powerful, and as a person who sets their mind to things and accomplishes them. And then we shifted gears with communication and relationships. So I gave you some tools for effective communication, shoveling while the piles were small, going direct, and the sweaty 10-minute conversation, so that you can create new agreements in your life and your relationships, and between people who are important to you. And so I want to leave you with this quote by Ralph Waldo Emerson, and I think it's just such an amazing quote, and I think it's absolutely true. You are the only person you are destined to become. Sorry, I'm reading backwards. The only person you are destined to become is the person you decide to be. So you absolutely can be the person who has a healthy, loving, soft place to land relationship with his or herself or their selves. And you can be the person who really feels connected and loved and supported in your relationships, and in relationships that are meaningful to you. And so it's just been a privilege to spend this time with you, and I look forward to seeing you again really soon.
Hey, Erika. Can you now see me?
Yep. Oh, no, I
Oh,
can't.
no, I can't. Do you want to just remove the screen sharing?
Oh, yeah. Hold on.
Perfect.
There we go. Did it stop? Or no?
Perfect.
Is it still there?
It is still there, but as you do that, first of
Okay,
all,
there.
thank you for the this whole presentation. I love it because every time you do a presentation, I end up learning even more and getting excited about everything. So that's fantastic. And I actually wanted to circle back to your role, your work as a coach. Obviously, the first step is to become aware of ourselves, our limitations, starting to observe and identify some of these limiting thoughts that we may have. But I'd like for you to like explain to us a little bit what's the difference between being aware, listening to a webinar or other tools, and actually working with a coach. How do you help people get to the next step, basically?
That's a great question. So, I mean, here's the thing, and I always, as a therapist, this was something that I thought was always really challenging, because if it was just about telling people what they needed to do, then everyone would just go do it. But that's not how it works. There are ways of thinking and being that we all have ingrained, and I am included in this. I actually stay in the supportive coaching for myself because I want to be able to see those blind spots and to be able to repattern things in my life and ways of thinking that are, you know, deeply rooted. And this is the thing that too that I really love about coaching, and I have obviously a deep respect for therapy too. But one of the things I love about coaching is just we identify what those beliefs are, or we look at ways of patterns that have been showing up, and we say, okay, now what? Not like, how did they get there? You know, that's maybe important in terms of insight, but it's not important in terms of changing anything. And so with the structure of support and also pulling in that vision piece, that's a really important part, because most of the time, without a clear pull, we just kind of wind up doing the same thing. But if we have a goal or something that we would absolutely love to create in our lives, especially if we have no idea how we're going to do that, that's a vision. You know, worthy goals happen all the time, and people can go out and do that for themselves a lot. But like when you're wanting to create something brand new, so like with athletes who are in transition and they've maybe had a really successful career, or they had to end by means of an injury, or they weren't anticipating ending for whatever reason, you know, that period of kind of disillusionment and it's totally normal to go through that. And one of the things that I want to just impart to everyone, if you're in that position, is there's something more for you. Your soul isn't done with you yet, because if it was, you wouldn't be breathing anymore. So that's really a powerful thing that I love to kind of connect my clients with, is that soul place, and really help them to live from that place. Because once we do, and this it's kind of like unlocking the code, then all kinds of things like open up, and you begin to start to feel that aliveness again and the quickening. And that's one of the things that I really love about supporting my athletes in really going through this process and realizing that next level purpose for their lives, because we all have one, otherwise we wouldn't be breathing anymore.
I love what you say, Erika, because you're talking about, you know, if it was just a matter of having the answers and following a guidebook or a self-help book, everybody would be able to do it. And we have tons of self-help books still.
Yep.
We have people that need assistance to get to the next step. And so I think working with a coach is really what gets you there. Being accountable, having someone who has perspective, who is not involved in your life, who has no judgment about what you're doing. There is no right and wrong.
Yes.
I think that's really important. I want to finish on one word that we keep hearing, and you did mention it in the presentation, is empowerment. And you had it as opposite to kind of being the victim. And so I'd like for you to give us a little bit more of your definition of empowerment. I think it's a buzzword that we hear a lot, but I'm not sure that everybody has a clear idea of what it means.
Yeah, no, that's a good question. It is, and it's kind of tossed around. So my version of kind of empowerment and what I've found to be super powerful, to use a derivative of the word, is really living from that point of power, which is within you. So like you said, like I always say to my clients, like, you're the highest authority. I can't tell anyone what gives them life. You're the highest authority on what gives you life. And when you're able to live from that place, and guide your decisions from, aliveness is my compass, joy is my guide. Not that means you won't ever have to do anything you don't want to do along the way to your vision or becoming the person, but really, when you're coming from that place, it just feels like you're in alignment. And we've all had that experience as athletes when we kind of feel like we're in flow, right? Where we kind of, things are just opening up, we're in the groove. That is a way of actually living. And that's what I think of when I talk about empowerment and work with my clients on feeling empowered and making decisions from a place of power. It's the point of power in you, and you're the highest authority on that guide. And I think that connects back to the observer self too. Like, you can notice, is this in alignment or out of alignment with me? And really start to practice moving in the direction of what gives you life, from that place of power. And that, to me, is true empowerment.
I love that. I love that it starts from you and then it powers through forward,
Yeah.
Super. Well, Erika, thanks for your time, the presentation, and answering my questions. I will share at the end of this webinar your contact information, where we can find you, your website, and your calendar link as well, if anybody wants to make an appointment.
Yeah, thanks.
And yeah, thank you again.
Oh, it's my pleasure, Miriam. Thanks for having me.
Thanks, Erika. Have a great one.
You too. Bye-bye.